Okay, great. So welcome everyone to this month's academic reading group session of the JLI. Very excited to be here with you today. Most of you will know me. So I'm Jennifer Eggert. I'm Senior Research Fellow at the JLI, part of the research team. We have my colleague Rima here, who's our Finance and Ops Manager. Our speaker today is Karsten Lehmann from, and now let me quickly peek at my notes, from the Church University College of Teacher Education in Wien, Krems. Or for the German speakers amongst us, die Kirchliche Pädagogische Hochschule Wien, Krems. And Karsten, Karsten is going to speak today and share some of his research with us. And then our respondent is Jeff Haynes from London Met University. Even you are Professor Emeritus in the meantime, aren't you, Jeff?
Yep.
Yeah, so I got that right. Yeah, and it's the usual format. You're all familiar with it if you have attended our sessions before. We have 25 minutes for Karsten to present his research, and I see he has a nice and shiny PowerPoint presentation for us. And then after that, Jeff is going to respond, share some reflections in 5 or 10 minutes. And as usual, after that, we have time for Q&A and comments. If you are in the audience and it's not too much of an inconvenience for you, and of course your internet connection allowing, it would be great if you could turn on your camera. It's just nicer when you speak and you look at people's faces rather than lots of black screens. Other than that, if you're sitting in the audience and you're like, oh, this sounds really interesting, and I would actually like to present my own research, then please just be in touch with Rima or me, and we can look into adding you to our schedule. Always have open slots for people to share their research on development, humanitarian action, peace building, as it intersects with faith. So I leave it at that and hand over to Karsten. Karsten, the floor is yours for the next 20 to 25 minutes.
Okay, Jennifer, thank you. And hello to everybody from Vienna, from sunny Vienna. The sun is shining, flowers are out, so it's a beautiful day. My name is Karsten Lehmann. I'm a sociologist, I'm a scholar of religions, and I am a research professor for interreligiosity here at the KPI in Vienna and Krems. And of course, I'm honored to be here and to share some thoughts on the construction of religion within the context of the United Nations General Assembly. And I'm looking very much forward to our discussions after the short presentation. In my presentation, it won't take too much time. I just want to do 2 things. First, I want to kind of give a frame of reference, or to provide you with a frame of reference with regards to my kind of approach to the study of what I call religiously affiliated non-governmental organizations. And then I will say a few words on the text that has been sent around. I won't go too much into detail because I think that most of you have read it and that we can then go right into the discussion. So let me start with a number of kind of more general remarks. As I said earlier, I am a scholar of religions. I'm not a scholar of international relations. I'm not a scholar of international politics. So as far as my research is concerned, I am primarily interested in religion rather than international relations, development, and so on and so forth. To be more exact, more precise, I am a scholar of religions that is very much influenced by what is frequently called the cultural turn, which, as far as I see, might be called kind of the mainstream approach to the study of religion in Europe, but not, for example, in the US or other parts, or not necessarily in the US or other parts of the world. This kind of is reflected in the concept of religion that kind of will provide the starting point for my presentation today. This one is taken from a handbook of critical terms in the study of religion. It's from a text written by Burkhard Gladiko, who has been one of kind of major figures in the study of religion in Germany. And in this introductory article, he makes the point that religion is a system of symbols that is characterized by its bearers, with reference to undeniable, collectively binding, and authoritatively given principles. So that puts me, and that puts him, into the tradition of the cultural turn, more precisely into the tradition of a specific reading of Clifford Geert's definition of religion. So that will be kind of one aspect of my starting point. As I said, also in the beginning, I'm also a sociologist. So in order to kind of present or to use a heuristic frame of reference for my analysis, I tend to use a kind of very simple three-level concept of religion, and I've put that on the next slide. On the right-hand side, you see once again the systems of symbols as kind of the major point of reference for my definition of religion. And what's important to me is that these systems of symbols can be constructed first on the individual level of religious identities, second on the level of organizations and movements, and third on the level of social discourses. So that's a simple kind of micro, meso, macro approach. And of course, what I would argue is that all these different levels are interrelated. Maybe another point that's important to me is, and you see that on the slide as well, that I would argue that the frontier, or like maybe the borderline, or the border strip between the things that are kind of part of religion and that are what you might say secular, this borderline is fuzzy. Yes, so I always tend to, at least as far as empirical analysis are concerned, tend to approach the borderline of religion as a fuzzy one. So, of course, in religiosity is kind of influenced by other individual or aspects of your personal identities. Organizations are not only religious, they also have to act within a formal setting that can be perceived as non-religious. And religious discourses are always influenced by political discourses, economic discourses, and so on and so forth. So that's kind of important to me. And of course, all of this changes over time. Therefore, we do have the timeline on the basis of this little three-level concept of religion. That's just to kind of be able to make explicit what is the starting point of my analysis or my presentation today. This might be helpful first to position religiously affiliated non-governmental organizations. Yes, they're obviously on the meso level of religion, but they're also obviously on the borderline between what is perceived as religious and what is perceived as secular. This is important in order to kind of understand internal dynamics within these organizations with regards to other parts of their respective religious tradition. It's also important with regards to the fact that these organizations might be more visible from the outside, from outside the religious fields as other organizations, for example, from the same religious tradition. Maybe just a few words on religious non-governmental organizations or religiously affiliated non-governmental organizations, because this is actually the major field of expertise with regards to international politics. Some of you might know the book Religious Non-Governmental Organizations in International Relations, which has been my postdoctoral thesis and has been published with Jeff's Religion and Politics series. In this book, it's based on archival analysis within the context of actually 3 different religiously affiliated organizations: the WCC, the Pax Romana, and the Quakers. And in this book, I argue that these organizations have developed from the 1940s up to the 1980s, and that their kind of internal dynamics have changed during those decades, from what I call church diplomacy to civil society activism. And I've just kind of printed you a quote from the final pages of my postdoctoral. The case analysis have made it possible to identify a general trend inside the RNGOs from church diplomacy to civil society activism. At the latest, this trend began in the 1940s with the perception inside the RNGOs that the UN was a place to interact with what they call the world, first in the sense of a global entity, and second in the sense of a social sphere opposed to the sphere of religion. From the 1960s onwards, the human rights discourse became an integral part of the self-perception of the cases, thus strengthening the link between religiously affiliated NGOs and the wider NGO community from the 1960s onwards, and thus the label civil society activism. Yes, so that's kind of, I think, a major change that has these organizations have undertaken around 1940 and then from the 1960s onwards. The 3-level concept of religion I've been introducing a few minutes ago might also be helpful to better understand the things I will be talking about today. And that's the concept of religion. So obviously, religiously affiliated organizations play a role in the way religion is conceptualized. But what I will have a look at today, or what we might want to discuss today, is the question how the concept of religion has been constructed within the context of the United Nations General Assembly. So once again, we are talking about this time a discourse, a social discourse on the concept of religion, on the border between the religious and the political field, or the field of international relations. So I hope that this kind of helps you to better understand my approach to the things I have been discussing in my paper. And let me just move on to the second part of my short introductory presentation, the concept of religion within the United Nations General Assembly. Now, what I want to do here is I want to do 2 things. First, I want to kind of provide you with an insight, or with the structure of the argument I have been presenting in this short paper. And then I will just refer to a number of points that might be interesting for further discussion, but obviously I don't want to intrude into Jeff's response, so I will make that very short. Okay, so the article you have been reading for this meeting today comes or is part of one of those huge editing projects undertaken by Stan Brunn throughout the last few years. This one was the World Language Map project, and it has been published with Springer, yes, with Springer in, I think, 5 volumes, 3,937 pages. In the paper, I first kind of position myself with reference to the question of the usage of language on a global basis. And then what I do on the second and third page is that I kind of present a discursive approach to the study of religion within the academic study of religions. That is, I wouldn't say mainstream, but I think it's fairly kind of established within the study of religion, certainly among those scholars that see themselves influenced by the cultural term. So I try to kind of to present the major features of such an approach to religion. And from that, I move towards the question, what is the institutional place of religion in the context of the United Nations? Underlining, of course, that the United Nations is primarily a federation of states, so that states do have kind of the major say within this context. I argue that we can find states that present themselves more along religious lines and others that are that present themselves primarily as being secular. And I shortly kind of refer to the religiously affiliated organizations as well, arguing that they, within this context, do have a significant role to play, but nevertheless, they are at the margin, or they are just one aspect of the United Nations as a whole. And this leads to a twofold argument that I try to present on the next few pages. And this argument is kind of focusing on what I present as two strands of the definition or the construction of religion within the United Nations. I argue that from the late 1960s onwards, the United Nations General Assembly has repeatedly been referring to religion within a human rights framework. So they say, yes, we propose that, and I give you the quotes in the papers, we propose that that religious freedom has to be kind of enforced within the context of the United Nations. Then this led to the 1981 Declaration on religion, and then later on to the resolution on the elimination of all forms of religious intolerance in 1993. So that's kind of one strand of the discussion of religion within the United Nations General Assembly, focusing on human rights. And then I argue that from 2000 onwards, the resolutions of the General Assembly have established a second strand of discussion on religion. And this strand is based on the concept of interreligious dialogue and harmony, or religious harmony, interreligious harmony. With regards to interreligious dialogue, because this is one field I'm kind of constantly working on empirically, with regards to interreligious dialogue, it's interesting to see how the notion of dialogue had been established within the context of the UN. And I get another quote on page 8 that illustrates that dialogue has primarily been used within this context in order to kind of to argue for an approach to conflict resolution that is not based on diplomacy. Yes, it's kind of dialogue has been perceived primarily within the East and West. Tensions as a tool to tackle conflict situations that can no longer be tackled within the context of traditional diplomacy. And this notion then has been introduced, or has been linked to the notion of interreligious dialogue in the around 2000, and later on has been linked to the concept of interreligious harmony. So that would be a second strand of the construction of volition that in a way is an ambiguous one, because on the one hand side, it underlines the significance of volition within the context of the UN, but on the other hand, it also kind of links the concept of religion to this type of non-diplomatic conflict resolution. Yes, and so today we are confronted with these two strands of the construction of religion within the GA. That more or less run parallel to each other. They sometimes refer to each other, but primarily they have been established as two independent strands. And this leads me to some kind of final observation that kind of bring the argument back to the question of how language is used to construct religion within the context of the General Assembly. So that's kind of the major argument. Now, what might be interesting points for further discussion, and I will just name those, and obviously Jeff will have totally different points he might be interested, or he will be interested in, and then we will follow his lead. One thing I might be interested to discuss with you, because I'm not an expert in this, is that the UN has no general policy of religion. The second point, the human rights discourse offers no definition of religion. A third point is that the language of human rights is no longer perceived as a sufficient tool to deal with religion, because we have kind of the second strand of the construction of religion within the GA. The general notion of dialogue indicates the need to find tools for conflict resolution beyond diplomacy. And fifth and finally, the ambiguous construction of religion as a potential problem, as well as a positive contributor to a culture of peace. Yeah, so all these things are kind of elaborated in my paper, and might be interesting to discuss these things a little bit in more detail. I will stop my presentation here. I have given you in the PowerPoint, and Jennifer told me that she will kind of send the PowerPoint round, so we will have the references at the end of the PowerPoint, kind of linking or kind of providing you with references to other pieces of research I have published throughout the last few years that are linked to international politics or international relations. Of course, I've worked on other fields as well, and if you want to have a look at the complete list of publications, then feel free to download it using the link at the bottom of this page. So thank you for your attention, and I'm looking forward to Jeff's response and then to our discussion.
Great, thank you so much, Karsten. And I can't help but notice that you finished in bang on 20 minutes. That's German precision and punctuality. I love it.
It's just by chance. No, I haven't.
Don't downplay it. It's one of our biggest strengths. We need to celebrate and embrace it.
Okay, yeah, and make other people frightened. Yeah, because. Okay. Do you want me to stop the presentation?
Yes.
I think we can do that, and then we have more space to see each other.
Okay?
Yeah,
fantastic. Yeah, I think that's a good idea, Karsten.
Okay.
Thank you so much. Yeah, and we'll hand over straight to Jeff for his response or reflections on what we've just heard from Karsten.
Okay, well, thanks very much. And thanks to Karsten for that. I've known Karsten for quite a long time, and I've always been impressed very much by his scholarliness and his good grasp of detail and the capacity to make a good argument. So thanks very much, Karsten, for that. Very interesting stuff. Unlike Karsten, I'm not a sociologist, and I, depending on the context, I sometimes apologize for that, or on other occasions I say, isn't that a good thing? So I'll leave it up to you, which I should emphasize today. My background is in international relations primarily, and I've written quite a lot about the role of religion in international relations. I wrote a book in 2014, which I called Faith-Based Organizations at the United Nations. You'll notice that Karsten used a different term. I think I'm right in saying that they're fairly synonymous, particularly the NGOs at the UN. They reflect a consensus that these are NGOs concerned mainly with things that most of us would identify as close to a religious tradition. So I won't say more about that. I thought it's very interesting, Karsten's timeline here, when he mentioned 1967 as when religion was linked to human rights, and 1981 when there was a kind of a firming up of that particular concern, 2002 when there's explicit references to the interreligious dialogue, and the word harmony caught my eye. It's an interesting word when it comes to religion, because of course it identifies something that we in international relations often identify as a problem with religion in international relations, which is the lack of harmony very often, where often in international relations the starting point for analyzing religion is in terms of conflict. So it's interesting, I think, that Karsten referred to harmony. My sense of the UN is that the UN is and always has been a very secular organization, one which is very uncomfortable with religion. There's a lot of good reasons for that. I won't mention them now. You will be aware of them, I suspect. But the thrust of that is that I find religion to be something which the UN is wary of and seeks, if possible, to keep at arm's length, and only engages with the issue of religion primarily when it's a problem. I think that's partly because member states of the UN regard religion as an internal matter, and they tend not to welcome international comment, much less condemnation of their policies in relation to religion. So when Karsten refers to the human rights dimension, this is, I think, in the context of an international concern with human rights, particularly political rights and civil liberty. And religious freedom is a kind of expression of that in a secular world, whereby it's not important what religion you profess. What's important is your right to profess that religion freely. And in the years of the Cold War, the United States, particularly under Ronald Reagan in the early 80s, was very concerned with the Soviet Union's repression of religion. And he used international religious freedom as a way of condemning the Soviet Union's wider curtailment of human rights in the Soviet Union. And just in parentheses, that's something which successive US governments have carried on over the years, using international religious freedom issues as a way of pursuing US foreign policy in relation to liberal democracy, individualistic human rights, and so on. So I think that the context of religion at the UN is largely dictated by how religion is regarded in international relations. And Karsten made a very good point, I think, that the UN is a state-based organization. All the power is in the hands of states, not just in terms of voting and Security Council activities and so on, but even more importantly, in relation to money. Without states, the UN would have no income. Crucial. So the UN, I think, is strongly disposed to follow the lead of states. And as states have a consensus, I believe, of keeping religion out of international politics, then it's interesting, as Karsten shows us, that the General Assembly has gradually engaged with religion. But I'd also want to mention, of course, that when we think about powerful organs of the UN, the General Assembly doesn't go very high up on that list. The General Assembly has no power to enforce anything. The General Assembly can only make recommendations, and ultimately it's the Security Council that will be the actor which can actually make the UN act militarily, financially, diplomatically. So I often see the General Assembly more as a sort of a sounding board for international opinion than actually a reflection of where power lies in international relations. Karsten also mentioned the year, well, he said around about 2000. I would be more explicit. I would say post 9/11. Post 9/11, the UN has been very concerned with religion, but not necessarily because there is more harmony around, but because post 9/11 there was an eruption of discord, disharmony, reflected in the 9/11 attacks. I wrote a book in 2018 on the United Nations Alliance of Civilizations, which was the UN body created after 9/11 to try to bring harmony, try to bring concord into interreligious interaction. And the interesting thing in relation to what Karsten has said, I think, about the UNAOC, the United Nations Alliance of Civilizations, is that the General Assembly isn't interested in it. And what I would have thought, as a hypothesis, that a body concerned with intercivilizational harmony should be something which gets the attention of the General Assembly. Not at all. It couldn't be less interested. I won't go into reasons why that is the case either. So just to conclude, so I know I've had my time. I find Karsten's presentation very, very interesting, how he traces the stages of the General Assembly's engagement with this word religion. But he also implicitly, I think, tells us that religion is a bit of a black box still. We can all agree that religious freedom is a good thing, because, hey, this is a human right to practice one's religion freely. But when we get into the realm of religious harmony, or religious concord, then it becomes very much more difficult, I think, for the General Assembly to actually do very much. Partly because states don't have religious power, generally speaking, and partly because states in the General Assembly, I think, most of the time are playing to the gallery of public opinion, whether at home or internationally. And what they say about religion is, I think, very often reflective of how their governments portray themselves in terms of religious issues, especially religious freedom. Finally, I think I'd probably say that despite the General Assembly's growing attention to religion and interreligious dialogue and religious harmony, my experience of the UN, and I spent a lot of time at the UN 3 or 4 years ago. I spent about 2 years researching into the United Nations Alliance of Civilization, which meant I was at the UN in New York a lot. What I was most struck by at the end of that was the indifference with which most states regarded religion. So on one hand, it's in the General Assembly, it's more prominent in the General Assembly. At the same time, my experience was that states really wanted religion to be subservient, to be not causing a problem, but generally just to go away and do its thing in private and not bother the rest of us with its concerns. So I found it very interesting, Karsten. Thank you for that, Karsten. Thank you very much, and very interested to see more of your research as it develops. So thank you.
Great.
Yes.
Yeah, thanks so much, Jeff, for sharing these points. Karsten, do you want to respond to anything directly before we open it up to everyone else?
Yes.
If you don't, yeah.
I can say a few words. I try to be short, and then we can have a general discussion. I think that might be more interesting for the other people around. So obviously, I just want to underline 2 points Jeff has already made. I really like the idea of the GA as a sounding board of international relations. Yes, because I also think that that kind of, it's the discursive power. Yes. That kind of forms the center of the GA, yes, that they kind of are, to a certain extent at least, and with regards to specific milieux, in the position to kind of formulate particular discourses. I really like that idea. I'm totally with you that religion has been and still is perceived as a black box. Yes, that's kind of why it might be interesting to have a closer look at the religiously affiliated NGOs. Yes, because it kind of opens up the black box, but on the other hand, it kind of questions the idea of representation that is frequently kind of pronounced by these organizations. Yes, we represent X, Y, Z. Yes, the CCIA represents the Protestants and Orthodox churches. Yes, if you kind of, if I might refer back to this three-level concept of religion, it's not a representation. It's a question, or it's just in a very formal sense a representation. It is more kind of a specific organization or part of an organization within the WCC that is targeting international relations and makes it, as I said already, more visible, but also kind of moves it away from what might be perceived as the center of the WCC, whatever that is. Yes. So that's the second point I just want to underline. Yes, I think that's true. Let me just say a few words on the notion of harmony. Yeah, obviously that's not my notion. Yes. And every time I am discussing this with my colleagues here that are working within the field of human rights, they are kind of terrified by the fact that the UN uses the notion of interreligious harmony. And that's kind of gets to a personal point, because the International Day of Interreligious Harmony is always in the week of my birthday. So I'm very much linked to interreligious harmony, but I totally understand that my colleagues argue it's a dangerous avenue. Yes, because human rights are rights. So you are kind of, you position yourself within the context of a rights discourse. And harmony obviously is not a legal discourse. Yes, it's linked to tolerance. Yes, and I'm living in Austria, so I know that tolerance is a notion that has been established during kind of the late ages, centuries of the Habsburgian Empire. Yeah, that's kind of the discourse that is happening there. Therefore, these colleagues are, they repeat over and over again that it's at least difficult if we do have these two different discourses, human rights and interreligious dialogue or interreligious harmony, side by side within the context of the United Nations. Yes, but I think that's, it's kind of more an affirmation of what Jeff has already been saying.
Okay, great. Thank you, Karsten. So that means that we have 15 minutes left, and we could take a couple of questions or comments from the audience. If you do have a question and your internet allows, it would be fantastic if you could turn on your camera and introduce yourself so that we know who you are. Stephen has raised a hand. Where is Stephen? But where is he now? Ah, there he is. Yeah, Stephen, please go ahead.
Thank you, Karsten and Jeffrey, for your response there. I'm Stephen Lichty. I'm based here in Nairobi. I see Esther Mambo is here as well. Hi, Esther. She's in Nairobi as well. Quick question, Karsten. If we, maybe just looking for comments here, if we unpack religion as a black box into, say, three groupings, the masses, the billions of people that have some sort of faith that might not be very orthodox, but it's practiced by billions. That's one component. The other are these large organizations, as you kind of had in your second sort of group, the World Council of Churches, the NGOs, and so forth. And then you have what I call the dark forces of religion, which are these religious nationalistic, sort of individuals that are capturing a form of religion and trying to reinvent a golden era. A particular Russian individual at the moment, comes to mind. So to me, religion is it's multifaceted, and it's too simple to just say it's a black box, because I think there's certain parts of religion that are very, problematic for the UN. But then there's others that are really engaged in peace activities and development and is doing these sort of things. So when you bring those debates to the UN, do one of those get more attention in your mind, or is it, the nationalistic individuals that are invading countries under the guise of religion that are truly the problem?
Maybe I start with a short response, and then we can take it from there. So yes, obviously, Stephen, I'm with you that kind of religious systems and symbols, that would be not my notion, are highly ambivalent, yes, and that you do have readings of religion that are peaceful, and that you do have readings of religion that are violent. Yes, as far as this goes, I'm still very much with Appleby. Yes, arguing. I wouldn't argue for the ambivalence of the sacred. Yes, because that's not my terminology, but I certainly would underline the ambivalence of religion with regards to kind of peaceful and violent readings of specific religious traditions. And Stephen, I'm totally with you that that what Olivier Roy would kind of describe as fundamentalist readings of religion, yes, that take away the cultural context of religion and try to kind of establish a pure Islam, pure Christianity, pure Buddhism, pure kind of spaghetti monster religion, yes, that this is a dangerous avenue, yes, in terms of politics as well as in terms of research. With regards to what kind of resonates with the debates within the United Nations, I would argue that actually you do have two sets of groups that are kind of present in different ways within the UN. On the one hand side, of course, as Jeff has already kind of pointed out, the violent aspects of religion, yes, and that happens on the individual, on the meso level, and on the discursive level, or the level of discourses, is very much present, or has been very much present within the context of the UN from 9/11 onwards. We might want to argue whether this is a development that started in 1989 or not, but certainly 9/11 has been an important kind of point of reference with regards to that. With regards to kind of organizations and individuals that are working within the UN, of course, the majority of those would link themselves to civil society. Yes, they would argue that they stand for human rights. They stand for a peaceful reading of their respective religious traditions. So in this sense, I think we have a kind of liberal, peaceful reading of religion that dominates the position of, or that is very kind of significant for the role of religion within the United Nations. Yes, two sets, two different ways of presence of religion. I hope that kind of resonates with what you've argued, Stephen.
He thanked you in the comments, so
You and you like the spaghetti monster, okay.
Yeah, so good. Any other questions or comments?
I have a question. Thank you very much, Karsten, for your presentation, and Jeff as well. So Karsten, I wonder if you could go back to kind of where you began with that sort of figure. And I wonder if you could share a bit of background in terms of, how you created it with the various boxes and well, the arrows, and that other box is kind of this way and not straight up and down, and maybe just tell us a bit more about that.
Okay, so that's
John.
yes.
Sorry, Karsten, just 1 second. John, can you also tell us a little bit about yourself? Where are you joining us from, and do you have an institutional affiliation?
North Central University, online, United States. I live full-time in Turkey. It's very sunny and warm here today. So yes, that's me.
Great, thank you, John. Thanks.
Okay, just a few words. Yes, kind of. I like to use this model as a heuristic point of reference for my analysis, because I think it helps to pinpoint kind of different layers of the construction of religion quite handily. Yes. Obviously, the distinction between micro, meso, and macro levels of society, that's kind of yes. Most sociologists would argue that this makes sense to make this distinction. The point I want to make that is that with regards to the systems of symbols, yes, as I argued with Gladigo and with reference to Clifford Geertz, yes, both of them argue that religion can be perceived as a specific system of symbols. We do have other systems of symbols, like in politics or in economics, but religion is perceived as a very specific one. The point I want to make is that that the systems of symbols are constructed in different ways. Yes, so that, for example, individuals that perceive themselves as being Catholic, yes, they of course are not necessarily following the avenue of the Vatican. Yes, so that would be the meso and the individual level. And the same goes with regards to specific discourses or debates in the religious field. For example, the discourse on human rights. Yes, you certainly know that there are a number of religious organizations that are the kind of champions of human rights, but that's kind of part of a much more complex discourse within the religious field. For me, it's important to always keep the link, or to always underline the link between these different levels of the construction of religion and the interdependencies on the individual, on the meso, and on the macro level with aspects of society that are not religious. Yes, so the human rights discourse obviously is also happening outside the religious field. Yes. Beliefs on values are kind of framed within a religious context or within, for example, the context of a union. Yes, and I think it's very important to always kind of look for these interdependencies between the religious field and other aspects of society. Yeah. I don't know, John, whether you read German. There's a book kind of where we presented this model, and we have lots of responses from other scholars of religion, but it's in German.
Good, thank you. Thank you for sharing more about it.
Okay, thanks, Karsten. Any other questions or comments from anyone? We have so many Alistairs in this call. Oh my God. What is it with all the Alistairs today? So many. Well, they don't seem to have any questions or comments, the Alistairs. Nor does anyone else seem to. But I actually have, not from Alistair P. No, that's fine, Alistair. That's fine. I actually have two questions or comments, Karsten. And the first one is, I couldn't help but notice that on one of your first slides, you spoke about religious organizations, and then you mentioned church diplomacy. This was in the beginning, right? When you spoke about the history of these organizations. And I just couldn't help but notice that that's quite a Christian-centric term. And obviously, if we look at the UN's engagement with religions, then Christians are actually in the minority, right? So I was just, this is one thing I noticed and I was wondering about, and maybe you can say a little bit about that. Maybe the question in this is, to what extent do you feel that your theories here do actually apply to religions more generally and not just to Christian ones? And then the other thing that I noticed was that you had on one of your, I think it was one of the later slides, and towards the end, you said that the UN doesn't have a policy towards religions, and that's obviously true. But then we also know that lots of UN agencies have faith engagement strategies, and that they have been developing these in recent years. And yeah, maybe do you have any thoughts on that? It's actually something that we have been working on at TGLI a lot, because we obviously also work with UN agencies a lot, and have been involved in helping UN agencies develop their faith strategies. And we actually have a publication that should be out very soon, where we sat down and analyzed these strategies to look at what are some of the common factors. And yeah, it was actually quite interesting to see.
Yes, thank you, Jennifer. With regards to church diplomacy, that's kind of it's a historic reconstruction. Yes. So when I use the notion of church diplomacy, then I'm referring to the 1940s and 50s. And in the 1940s and 50s, the majority of the religiously affiliated NGOs had been Christian at the time. Yes, there were some exceptions to that rule. I'm very much aware of the fact that you can't use that notion, or it's difficult to apply this notion within the context of other religious traditions. But I think as far as the development of these NGOs are concerned, it makes sense, because at the time we have primarily been facing religious Christian non-governmental organizations within the context of the UN. Yes.
Oh, so you mean organizations that were engaging with the UN? That's
yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. So
yes.
that's specific. Okay. All
yes.
right. Okay.
So because that's only the analysis is only referring to those organizations that are kind of officially affiliated with the UN via the NGO status. Yeah. It might be interesting to have a look at other organizations, at some of those organizations that have not been that didn't have a Christian background at the time. Once again, these were not too many, but there were some of them. And it will be, in this case, it will be an interesting question to what extent it's possible to have other notions. Yes. I do suspect that all the representatives of these NGOs during the 1940s and 50s perceived themselves primarily as diplomats. Yes, kind of being on a kind of face-to-face level with with national diplomats. Yes, and they didn't perceive themselves as civil society agents. Yes. Because I think that changed later on. But to what extent they perceive themselves as representatives or as diplomats linked to a specific religious institution, that would kind of be the parallel construction to church. I don't know. I really don't know. It's, I think, an open question. Policy of religion, yes, I'm very much looking forward to your publication. I think that's a very interesting field. And it's interesting to see that during the last maybe 2 decades, yes, some of the UN agencies have been slowly opening up towards religion or religious discourses, religious organizations, religious points of view. I don't know to what extent this will lead towards a general policy with regards to religion. Yes, I think that's really an open question at the moment. But it's a very difficult one, yes, because the UN is not in the position to kind of link itself to older traditions. Yes, you being from Germany, you know that in the German Grundgesetz, the constitution, they actually refer to an older constitution with regards to the question, what is the legal status of religious organizations in Germany? And the reason being that they could not reach a consensus in the post-war, post-Second World War era with regards to how to relate, how to define the relationship between religion and the state, or churches and the state at the time. The UN certainly doesn't have a tradition with regards to that, so I think it might be very, very difficult to establish a general policy for the United Nations. And what you've said with regards to church diplomacy, that obviously adds to the complexity of the situation.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Karsten. I was just looking at the time, and it is past 3 o'clock here in the UK, whatever time that is where you are based. Yeah, I would just like to thank everyone, and first and foremost, Karsten and Jeff, of course. Apologies to all the Alistairs who have been apologizing in the chat. I really didn't mean to put you on the spot, and it's absolutely fine if you don't have any questions. We take people who have questions and who actively contribute to the discussion, but we are also absolutely fine with people who just sit and listen in. So you're all most welcome, whatever your level of contribution today may be. Good. So I think we leave it at that. So good to see all of you and to hear from you. And I think, Rima, please correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the next session is in 2 months' time. Is that correct? What are we now? April? Is it in June?
Well, for this one, actually, we do have a speaker signed up for May 12th.
Okay.
So it will be Professor Catherine Marshall presenting, who's from Georgetown University.
Okay, amazing. So yeah, we have exciting sessions coming up, and you can have a look at our website where you can find the list of all the upcoming sessions, and you can sign up there to receive reminders. Yeah, so please stay in touch. And as I said in the beginning, if you would like to present some research of your own, then that's something that we're also interested in hearing about. And the wonderful Rima has put the link in the chat. Isn't that great? So you have it all there in front of you. Yeah, and just have a good rest of your day and rest of your week, and see you soon.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.